I thought I was just dropping off a package for my neighbor's mom. But one quiet afternoon alone with her made me see I never planned to stay. The idea was simple. Walk across the street, drop the small cardboard package on the porch, and head back home. But the moment I stepped up to Laura Carter's door, everything shifted. She opened it almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. Her presence always carried a kind of effortless grace. Dark hair pinned loosely back, the faintest touch of perfume trailing behind her. I held out the package, awkward in my own skin, but she smiled and tilted her head. "You're not leaving already, are you? At least come in for some tea." I hesitated. I wasn't used to being alone with her. Most of my memories of Laura were in the background. The woman who brought extra cookies during the holidays, the polite smile at neighborhood barbecues, the encouraging voice cheering her son and me from the sidelines when we were kids. But now, standing in her doorway at 24, I felt something different, like the air between us had a quiet weight to it. She stepped aside, waiting, and I heard myself agree. Sure, just for a minute. The house had the kind of stillness that only comes when children grow up and leave. Pictures lined the hallway. Her son as a toddler, a school athlete, his college graduation. They felt like pieces of a life I had glimpsed but never really understood. The living room glowed warmly in the late afternoon light. Laura moved with an easy confidence, setting out 2 cups on a small tray. The scent of jasmine tea filled the air, blending with the faint sweetness of something baking. "Sit wherever you like," she said. Her voice was calm, but carried a softness that drew me in. I lowered myself onto the couch, trying not to look too restless. She joined me a moment later, settling into the armchair across from me. For a while we just sipped tea, exchanging safe topics. How busy her week had been, how strange it felt for the neighborhood to be so quiet. But the pauses between our words grew longer, stretched by something unspoken. At one point, she laughed lightly at a story I told about a clumsy professor of mine. The sound of it surprised me. Not forced, not polite, but a genuine laugh that made her eyes crease with warmth. I realized I hadn't heard her laugh that freely before. She reached for the sugar bowl and slid it across the table toward me. Our hands brushed for just a moment, barely a touch, but it was enough to send a flicker of awareness through me. Her hand lingered a second longer than necessary before she withdrew. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt like standing on the edge of something, waiting for a step neither of us had decided to take. I told myself it was just tea, just a polite neighborly gesture. But as I looked at her, the calm strength in her posture, the quiet vulnerability in her eyes, I couldn't ignore the truth. Something about this afternoon was already different. Her and myself. The tea had long gone lukewarm by the time either of us noticed. We had drifted past the easy topics, neighbors, errands, the weather, and now silence sat between us. Not the kind that begged to be filled, but the kind that lingered, heavy with something neither of us wanted to name. Laura's gaze moved toward the window, where the sunlight fractured across the glass. She traced the rim of her teacup with one finger before finally speaking. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes this house feels too big." I looked around. The walls were lined with memories, photographs, souvenirs, little reminders of the years she had built here with her family. But now it felt hollow, like a beautiful stage after the actors had gone. Her voice caught slightly, and she gave a small smile, as if to soften the admission. "It's strange. You spend years wishing for quiet, and then one day you get it, and it's not the peace you thought it would be." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to hearing her speak like this, without the polished certainty she usually carried. For a moment, she didn't seem like the confident neighbor I'd always known. She seemed human, vulnerable. "I can imagine," I murmured, though I knew I couldn't, not really. Her eyes flicked back to mine. "No, you're too young to imagine it yet. You still have everything rushing toward you. But someday, maybe." She trailed off, her expression softening. "You'll understand what it's like when the world slows down and you're not sure if you're ready for it." I shifted slightly closer without thinking, the old wooden chair creaking as I leaned in. Our knees brushed under the table, a fleeting touch that neither of us moved to break. She noticed. I could tell by the way her breath caught, just barely, before she steadied herself. I wanted to ask her more, about her days, her nights, what she missed most. But the questions felt too personal, too raw. So instead, I simply stayed quiet, letting the closeness speak for me. She gave a small laugh, though it wasn't from amusement. more like a release of tension. Listen to me, rambling about empty houses and quiet rooms. You must think I'm terribly sentimental. Not at all, I said, my voice lower than I expected. I think it's honest. Her lips parted as though she wanted to reply, but instead she just looked at me. Really looked. And in that pause, I felt the weight of everything unspoken. The years between us, the way the world might frown if it saw us like this, and yet, the undeniable pull drawing us closer. The air between us seemed fragile, like glass, and I had this sudden, reckless thought that if I reached for her hand, she wouldn't pull away. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I let the silence wrap around us, warm and fragile, knowing that something had shifted. Something neither of us could easily undo. In a way I never expected, the silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with possibility. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the hallway, each second louder than the last. Laura set her cup down carefully, as though she needed both hands free. Her fingers smoothed the fabric of her skirt, then stilled. She drew in a breath, slow and steady, before speaking. It's strange, isn't it? Her voice was quiet. How some conversations feel ordinary, and others feel like you'll remember them for a long time. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and something in the way she looked at me made my chest tighten. There was warmth there, yes, but also hesitation, like she was daring herself to admit something without saying it aloud. I shifted from the chair to the edge of the couch, instinctively closing the space between us. My knee brushed hers again, deliberate this time. She didn't move away. Instead, she tilted her head, studying me with a mixture of curiosity and something more fragile. Vulnerability. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt fragile, electric. Then, almost without thinking, I reached out, slow enough that she could stop me if she wanted to. My hand found hers where it rested on her knee. Her skin was soft, warm, and when she turned her palm upward to meet mine, the gesture was small, but full of meaning. She let out a breath that was almost a sigh. "You're very kind," she murmured, though her voice trembled just slightly at the edges. I shook my head. "I'm just here." Her lips curved in the faintest smile, one that seemed to fight against all the reasons she shouldn't be smiling at me like that. Her thumb brushed lightly across my hand, tentative at first, then lingering. The sensation sent a quiet rush through me, the kind that comes when a line you never expected to cross suddenly feels impossibly close. We stayed like that, hands joined, the world outside forgotten. At one point she leaned back, her shoulder brushing against mine. The contact was simple, innocent even, but it carried more weight than words could hold. Her voice broke the silence again, softer now. "Do you ever wonder why some people come into your life when they do? Almost as if timing itself has a say in it." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Lately, yes." She turned to face me fully, and in that moment, her eyes were no longer guarded. They were open, searching, almost daring me to hold the gaze. Without breaking eye contact, she lifted her free hand and smoothed a strand of hair that had fallen across my forehead. The gesture was tender, deliberate, and it left a warmth that lingered long after her hand dropped. For a second, I thought she might lean closer. Maybe I thought I would. Instead, she squeezed my hand gently, grounding us both. The clock ticked on, steady, reminding us that the afternoon couldn't last forever. But the way she held my hand told me we had already stepped into something neither of us could ignore. The daylight had shifted by the time I realized how much of the afternoon had passed. The living room, once bright with gold, now carried a softer, fading light. The corners seemed to darken, leaving just the two of us in a quiet glow that felt removed from the rest of the world. Laura glanced at the window, then back at me, her hand still resting in mine. She gave a small, reluctant smile. "You should probably be heading home. People will wonder what we've been talking about all this time." Her words were light, but I could hear the note beneath them, the hesitation, the unwillingness to let the moment go. I nodded, though my chest tightened at the thought of leaving. Slowly, carefully, I released her hand, but the space it left behind felt like an ache. She stood, smoothing the folds of her blouse, and I rose too. Neither of us hurried toward the door. We moved as though time had thickened, each step drawn out. In the hallway, she paused to adjust a framed photo of her son on the wall. Her fingers lingered on the glass before she turned to me. "Thank you for keeping me company today. It's been nice. More than nice." Her honesty caught me off guard, and I felt heat rise to my face. It was good for me too, better than I expected. We both laughed softly at that, the kind of laugh that eased tension but didn't erase it. At the door, she reached for the handle, then hesitated. She looked at me with a mixture of steadiness and vulnerability, as though weighing whether to cross a final line. Her hand lifted, brushing gently at my collar, straightening it like it mattered. But the touch lingered too long to be casual. I didn't move, didn't speak, just let her fingertips rest there, light as a whisper, until she finally pulled them back. Then, without warning, she leaned in. Her lips touched my cheek, warm, deliberate, tender. The kiss was brief, but it lingered in its own way, more lasting than anything we'd said all afternoon. When she stepped back, her expression was unreadable at first, then softened into a smile tinged with wistfulness. "Take care of yourself," she said quietly. I swallowed, trying to steady the mix of emotions rising in me. "You too." She opened the door, letting the cooler evening air drift in. I stepped onto the porch, turning back for one last look. She stood framed in the doorway, her silhouette outlined by the soft light behind her. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence said enough, that something had shifted today, something fragile, tender, and impossible to ignore. As I crossed the street back to my own house, I touched my cheek where her lips had been, the warmth still there. And I knew, no matter how ordinary tomorrow looked, nothing between us would ever feel entirely ordinary again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the afternoon like it was etched on film. Every detail lingered, the warmth of her hand in mine, the way her laugh had carried through the stillness, the tender press of her lips against my cheek. It wasn't just attraction. It was something heavier, something that refused to be brushed aside as coincidence. I kept asking myself why it mattered so much. Why her, why now? The truth, though, was simple. Laura wasn't just my neighbor's mom anymore. She was a woman who had let me glimpse her vulnerability, her loneliness, her quiet strength. And once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. I found myself wondering what she was doing at that very moment. Sitting by the window with a book? Washing dishes with the kitchen lights spilling onto the porch? Or maybe lying awake, just like me, thinking about how the day had unfolded. Part of me wanted to believe she felt the same shift I did. But another part reminded me of the weight she carried, her age, her reputation, the way the world might judge if it knew. And yet, that kiss, that simple, deliberate kiss on my cheek, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't meaningless. The days that followed blurred together in their ordinary rhythm. But every time I glanced across the street and saw her car in the driveway, or the faint glow of her living room lamp, I felt it. That quiet connection humming beneath the surface, waiting. I caught myself lingering on the porch longer than usual, half hoping she'd step outside. Sometimes she did. And when our eyes met across the street, she would smile, not the casual neighborly smile I'd known for years, but one tinged with memory. As if we were both carrying a secret no one else could see. One evening, a few days later, I ran into her while bringing out the trash. The air was cool, the street lamp buzzing softly overhead. She was in a loose sweater, her hair falling casually over her shoulders. "Hey," I said, too quickly, too nervously. "Hey," she echoed, her voice gentle. We stood there longer than we should have, with nothing pressing us to leave. Her eyes lingered on mine in that same searching way, and I realized the afternoon hadn't been a moment lost in time. It was something alive, still unfolding. As we said goodnight and turned back toward our separate houses, I felt a quiet certainty settle in me. Whatever this was, fragile, complicated, maybe even forbidden, it wasn't over. And though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, I knew one thing for certain. The echo of that afternoon would stay with us both, shaping every glance, every word, every silence that followed. Something had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. A week had passed since that afternoon, but the memory clung to me like the warmth of sunlight on skin. Every time I saw Laura across the street, or heard the soft hum of her voice as she answered her phone, I felt a pull I couldn't ignore. That evening, I found myself walking over without a clear reason. I carried nothing this time, no packages, no errands. Just the vague, restless hope of seeing her again, of sharing the quiet that seemed to exist only between us. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd sensed me coming. Her hair was loose, the strands falling across her shoulders in soft waves, and the faint glow of the living room behind her made her look almost ethereal. "Come in," she said, her tone warmer than usual, and I stepped inside, feeling the familiar comfort of her home wrap around me. We sat on opposite ends of the couch this time, a little distance between us, but the air was thick with what had been left unsaid before. Laura poured us both tea again, her hands moving with calm precision, yet I noticed the small tremor when our eyes met across the table. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, tracing the rim of her cup with her finger, "about that afternoon and about how things feel now." I nodded, my heart racing. "Me too." She took a deep breath. "I don't want this to be reckless or misunderstood, but I also can't pretend it didn't matter to me." Her words were careful, measured, but there was a vulnerability beneath them that made me want to bridge the gap between us. Slowly, I moved my chair closer, stopping just short of touching her. My fingers brushed my own cup nervously before I finally spoke. "I don't want to pretend either. I care about you. More than I expected." Her eyes softened, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at her lips. She leaned forward slightly, just enough for our knees to brush under the table. That simple contact carried the weight of trust, of acknowledgement. "I think," she said, "we need to be honest about what this is, but also patient and careful. There's a lot at stake, for both of us." I nodded, understanding. There was truth in her words. The world outside might not approve, and yet the connection between us had a quiet inevitability. Something grounded, something real. We stayed like that for a long while, sipping tea, letting our knees touch lightly, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. There was no rush, no pressure, just a mutual understanding that what had shifted between us was real, and it deserved respect. When it was finally time to leave, she walked me to the door. We lingered there, close but careful, hands brushing lightly once more. "Until next time?" I asked, my voice low. "Until next time," she replied, and I could see it in her eyes. A promise, quiet and unspoken, that neither of us would let this connection fade. As I walked back across the street, the evening air cool around me, I felt something settle inside me. It wasn't a resolution in the conventional sense, but it was a beginning built on trust, understanding, and the quiet knowledge that some bonds, once formed, could never be undone. Weeks had passed since our conversation on the couch, and yet the memory of that afternoon remained vivid, like sunlight trapped in a room. I caught myself smiling at the smallest things, a message from Laura, a glance across the street, or the way the evening light hit her living room window. That Saturday, I found myself lingering longer in my own home, staring out at her house. The scent of jasmine floated faintly through the open window, carrying memories I couldn't shake. And then, as if drawn by the same invisible thread, she stepped onto her porch. "Hey," she called softly. Her voice was warm, unhurried. "Hey," I replied, walking over instinctively. We met at the edge of the sidewalk, a few feet between us, but it felt closer than any distance I had crossed in weeks. The sunlight fell over us, not harsh but golden, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "I brought something," I said finally, holding out a small bundle of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. It wasn't important, but the gesture felt natural, like the way we'd learned to communicate without words. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, and I felt that same quiet electricity I'd come to recognize. "You always think of the little things," she said, smiling, a warmth that reached her eyes. We stood there, talking about nothing, yet every word carried weight. She laughed softly at something I said, leaning back slightly on the porch railing. The movement was casual, effortless, but every shift, every glance, seemed charged with the intimacy we had nurtured over the past weeks. I noticed the faint crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the gentle way her hand lingered on the railing as if it was grounding her. I realized then that our connection wasn't built on grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was in the small things, the touches, the glances, the pauses that spoke louder than sentences ever could. "I've been thinking," she said after a pause, her voice soft, almost hesitant, "about how rare it is to feel understood without having to explain everything." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "I feel that too. With you." For a long moment, we simply stood there, letting the warmth of the afternoon settle around us. Her hand brushed lightly against mine, not enough to be noticed by anyone else, but enough for us. Enough to remind us that what existed between us was real, quiet, and mutual. As the sun dipped lower, we finally parted, promising to see each other again soon. I watched her retreat into her house, the door closing softly behind her, leaving a gentle stillness in the air. Walking back across the street, I felt something I hadn't felt before: calm. Not the restless excitement of an unspoken attraction, but a steady, grounded sense that whatever was between us had roots. That afternoon, I realized that some shifts aren't dramatic. They aren't sudden. They are quiet, enduring, and powerful in their subtlety. And for the first time in weeks, I felt certain of one thing. This connection, however unconventional, had changed us both. And it was only just beginning.